Pressure is not the problem. The problem is what pressure does to your mind when you haven't trained it. Every day you are asked to decide what to say, what to do, what to ignore, what to fight for. Some decisions are small and quiet. Others arrive when emotions are high. Time is short and consequences matter, and it is in those moments, not the calm ones, that the quality of your thinking is truly revealed. Most people believe that clear thinking disappears because life becomes complicated. But that is not the truth. Clarity disappears because the mind becomes reactive. Under pressure, thoughts speed up, emotions rise, and attention collapses inward. The body tightens, the breath shortens, the mind rushes to escape discomfort instead of understanding the situation. Decisions are made not from wisdom but from urgency. This audiobook is about reversing that pattern. Because the difference between people who fall apart under pressure and people who remain steady is not intelligence. It is not talent. It is not luck. It is training. When pressure hits, the untrained mind looks for relief. It wants the feeling to stop. It wants certainty. It wants approval. It wants control. And in chasing those things, it sacrifices clarity. Words are said too quickly. Choices are made too early. Actions are taken that feel right in the moment and wrong later. But there is another way to meet pressure. Calm does not mean passive. Slow does not mean weak, and thinking clearly does not mean having all the answers. It means having enough control over your inner state to see what actually matters. Clear thinking is not a personality trait, it is a discipline. Think about the last time you felt overwhelmed. Maybe someone confronted you. Maybe you were under a deadline. Maybe the stakes felt high and everyone expected something from you. In that moment, your thoughts probably raced ahead of your awareness. You reacted before you chose. You spoke before you reflected. And afterward, you replayed it in your mind, wishing you had responded differently. That moment was not a failure of character. It was a signal. It showed you how your mind behaves. When pressure removes the comfort of time, pressure strips away excuses. It removes rehearsed confidence. It exposes habits of thought that usually stay hidden. And what it reveals is simple. Without training, the mind defaults to emotion. This audiobook is not about eliminating pressure from your life. That is impossible. Pressure is part of responsibility. Pressure is part of growth. Pressure is part of meaning. What matters is whether pressure controls you or whether you can remain clear inside it. Clarity does not come from thinking harder. It comes from thinking cleaner. To think clearly under pressure, you must learn to create space between stimulus and response, space between emotion and action, space between what is happening and the story your mind tells about it. That space is where better decisions lie. In that space, you stop reacting. In that space, you regain choice. In that space, you lead yourself. Most people never train this skill. They wait for calm conditions to feel confident. They rely on motivation, reassurance, or certainty. And when those disappear, so does their clarity. Their decisions become inconsistent. Their words lose weight. Their presence becomes unstable. But people who are trusted under pressure, leaders, problem solvers, anchors in chaos, are not immune to emotion. They feel everything. The difference is that they do not obey every feeling. They observe it. They regulate it. They decide anyway. This audiobook will teach you how to do the same, not through theory, not through hype, but through principles and practices that build internal stability. You will learn how to slow your thinking without freezing, how to separate facts from emotional noise, how to make decisions without waiting for perfect certainty, and how to remain clear when others around you are panicking. You will not be asked to suppress emotion. Suppression creates tension, and tension clouds judgment. Instead, you will learn how to acknowledge emotion without letting it drive the outcome. You will learn how to stand inside pressure without being pushed by it. Because clarity is not found by escaping discomfort. Clarity is built by staying present within it. As you move through this audiobook, you will notice something important. The practices you will learn are simple, but they are not easy. They require repetition. They require awareness. They require humility, the willingness to admit when emotion has taken the wheel, and that is why they work. By the end of this audiobook, the goal is not that pressure disappears. The goal is that when pressure arrives, your mind does not collapse. Your breathing steadies, your attention widens. Your decisions come from values, not fear. You will not rush. You will not freeze. You will choose. This is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming unshakable. Pressure will always test you. That will never change. But what can change starting now is how prepared your mind is to meet that test. Clarity is not a gift. It is a skill, and it can be trained. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Why Pressure? Chapter 1. Why Pressure Destroys Clear Thinking. Destroys clear thinking. Pressure does not confuse your mind by accident. It does it by design. When pressure appears, your nervous system does not ask for wisdom. It asks for safety. It scans for threat, urgency, and risk. And the moment it decides something is at stake, it shifts control away from deliberate thinking and hands it to survival mechanisms that evolved long before clarity ever mattered. This is why intelligent people still make poor decisions under pressure. Under stress, the mind narrows. Attention collapses. Options disappear. You stop seeing the whole picture and begin reacting to fragments. A single comment feels like an attack. A small problem feels like a crisis. Time feels compressed. Everything feels urgent even when it isn't. Pressure does not make you think worse. It makes you think smaller. Your body tightens. Your breathing shortens. Your thoughts speed up, but your awareness shrinks. This creates the illusion of productivity, movement, action, response without the substance of clarity. You feel busy, decisive, and alert. Yet afterward you often realize you acted too fast, spoke too much, or chose from fear instead of judgment. This is not weakness, it is biology. The human brain was not designed for calm reasoning in high-stakes situations. It was designed to survive. When pressure rises, the brain prioritizes speed over accuracy, immediate relief over long-term outcomes, reaction over reflection. And unless you have trained against this default, pressure will always win. Most people misunderstand this dynamic. They believe clear thinking fails because they are bad under stress or not confident enough. But confidence does not create clarity, control does. Clarity requires space. Pressure removes space. That is the real danger. When space disappears, emotion fills the gap. Fear, anger, urgency, and pride rush in to complete the story. You begin interpreting instead of observing. You assume instead of verifying. You defend instead of understanding. And once emotion takes the lead, your decisions become about managing discomfort, not solving reality. Think back to a moment when pressure got the better of you. Maybe you sent a message too quickly. Maybe you agreed to something you later regretted. Maybe you escalated a conflict that didn't need escalation. At the time, it felt justified, necessary, obvious. Only later did clarity return. That delay is the cost of untrained thinking. Pressure does not reveal who you are. It amplifies what you haven't trained. If you have not trained patience, Pressure amplifies impatience. If you have not trained restraint, pressure amplifies impulsiveness. If you have not trained self-awareness, pressure amplifies ego. This is why people who appear calm in normal conditions suddenly fall apart when stakes rise. Their calm was conditional. It depended on comfort. The moment comfort vanished, so did their clarity. But pressure itself is not the enemy. Pressure is neutral. It is information. It shows you exactly where your mental habits live. It exposes whether your thinking is guided by principles or by feelings. It reveals whether your decisions come from values or from fear of consequences. People who think clearly under pressure are not immune to stress. They simply recognize what pressure does to the mind, and they refuse to let it drive unchecked. They understand one critical truth. The first loss under pressure is perspective. When pressure hits, the mind exaggerates. A single outcome becomes everything. A temporary setback feels permanent. A small mistake feels fatal. The future collapses into a narrow tunnel where only one result seems acceptable. In that tunnel, there is no room for nuance, patience, or strategy. This is where clear thinking breaks. Because clear thinking depends on proportion, on context, on the ability to see more than one move ahead. Pressure strips that away by forcing your attention into the present moment without awareness. You are here, but you are not grounded. You are alert but not stable. You are awake but not aware. And awareness is the foundation of clarity. Without awareness, the mind confuses urgency with importance. It treats loud emotions as reliable signals. It mistakes discomfort for danger, and it pushes you toward actions that reduce tension quickly rather than decisions that serve you well. This is why pressure leads to overreactions, to defensive words, to rushed commitments, to decisions that feel strong in the moment and weak in hindsight. The solution is not to eliminate pressure. The solution is to stop letting pressure collapse your inner space. Clear thinkers do something different when pressure arrives. They do not try to outthink the situation. They do not force confidence. They do not rush to regain control externally. They slow down internally. They recognize the physiological shift. They notice the tightening. They feel the urge to react, and they pause. Not because they are indecisive, but because they understand that the first impulse under pressure is rarely the best one. That pause is everything. It interrupts the survival loop. It widens attention. It restores proportion. It gives the mind just enough space to move from reaction to choice. And this is the skill you will begin training throughout this audiobook. Because once you understand why pressure destroys clear thinking, you stop blaming yourself for the effect and start taking responsibility for the training. Pressure will always test you, but it does not have to control you. Clarity under pressure is not a gift. It is a practiced response, and practice begins with awareness. Chapter 2. The difference between reacting and choosing. Chapter 2. The difference between reacting and choosing. Most mistakes under pressure are not caused by bad intentions. They are caused by unexamined reactions. A reaction is fast, automatic, and emotional. A choice is slower, deliberate, and conscious. The problem is that under pressure, these two feel identical. When something triggers you, an accusation, a deadline, a sudden change, the body responds before the mind understands. Muscles tense. Breathing shifts. Thoughts rush forward with a single goal. Respond now. Say something. Do something. In the discomfort, that urge feels urgent because it is biological, but urgency does not mean accuracy. Reacting is the mind trying to protect itself from discomfort. Choosing is the mind deciding what actually matters. This distinction changes everything. When you react, you are not deciding, you are obeying. You are following the strongest internal signal in that moment, usually fear, anger, or the need to regain control. The action may look confident, decisive, or forceful, but it is not grounded. It is driven. When you choose, you introduce intention. You acknowledge the feeling without surrendering to it. You create a gap between what happens and what you do next. That gap is small, often just a few seconds, but it is powerful. That gap is where freedom lives. Most people live without it. They believe they are choosing, but they are mostly reacting. Reacting to tone, reacting to pressure, reacting to expectations, reacting to imagined outcomes. Their days become a series of emotional impulses stitched together by rationalizations afterward. Under pressure, this pattern intensifies. Someone challenges you and you interrupt. Someone doubts you and you defend. Someone rushes you and you rush back. Each reaction feels justified, logical, necessary. But when you look back, you often see that the reaction made things worse. It escalated tension. It closed options. It locked you into a path you wouldn't have chosen calmly. That is the cost of reaction. Choosing feels different. Choosing does not remove emotion. It contains it. You still feel the heat. You still feel the pull. But instead of moving immediately, you observe it. You recognize the impulse without acting on it. You allow the emotion to exist without letting it decide. This does not require long reflection. It requires awareness. The moment you notice, I feel the urge to react, you have already stepped out of reaction. That awareness creates leverage. Reacting shrinks perspective. Choosing expands it. When you choose, you're no longer trying to end the feeling. You're asking better questions. What is actually happening? What matters here? What response aligns with my values, not my emotions? These questions do not appear when the mind is rushing. They appear only when there is space, and space is not given under pressure. It is taken. This is why people who think clearly under pressure appear slower, calmer, and more grounded. They are not slower in action. They are slower in impulse. They do not confuse speed with effectiveness. They understand that one extra moment of restraint can prevent hours of regret. Reacting feels powerful in the moment. Choosing feels powerful afterward. One of the biggest illusions under pressure is the belief that immediate response equals strength. In reality, an uncontrolled reaction is a loss of control. Strength is shown by the ability to pause when everything inside you wants to move. This pause is not passive. It is an active restraint. It signals to your nervous system that you are not in danger. It lowers internal noise. It restores access to higher thinking. And once that happens, your response changes. Not because the situation changed, but because you did. This is why reacting gives power away and choosing gives it back. When you react, circumstances control you. When you choose, you control yourself. Throughout this audiobook, you will return to this distinction again and again, not as an idea, but as a practice. Because the quality of your decisions under pressure depends entirely on how often you move from reaction to choice. You do not need to eliminate reactions. You need to interrupt them. And the interruption begins with a simple disciplined habit, noticing the urge before obeying it. That is where clear thinking starts. Chapter 3. How to slow your mind when everything feels urgent. Chapter 3. How to slow your mind when everything feels urgent. Urgency is one of the most convincing illusions the mind creates under pressure. It feels real, it feels immediate, and it feels dangerous to ignore. But urgency is often a signal of internal overload, not external necessity. When pressure rises, the mind speeds up to keep control. Thoughts stack on top of each other. Scenarios multiply. Consequences feel closer than they are. The nervous system interprets speed as safety. Move fast so nothing gets worse. And in that rush, clarity is the first thing sacrificed. Slowing your mind does not mean slowing your actions. It means slowing the noise that drives them. Most people try to manage urgency by pushing harder. They multitask. They talk faster. They decide quicker. But speed stacked on speed only increases chaos. The mind becomes crowded, not clear. You are moving, but you are not steering. Clear thinkers do the opposite. When everything feels urgent, they reduce pace internally before they respond externally. They understand a simple truth. If the mind is racing, any decision made from it will inherit that instability. Slowing the mind begins with the body. Under pressure, the body tightens automatically. Breathing becomes shallow. Shoulders rise. The jaw clenches. These are not small details. They are commands to the brain that something is wrong. As long as the body signals danger, the mind will not slow. This is why the fastest way to regain clarity is not to think differently, but to breathe differently. A slower breath tells the nervous system there is no immediate threat. It widens attention. It interrupts the loop of urgency. And once the body settles, the mind follows. This is not relaxation, it is regulation. When the breath slows, thoughts lose their sharp edge. The mind stops, sprinting ahead. You begin to notice what is actually happening instead of what might happen. That shift alone can change the quality of a decision. The next step is narrowing focus. Urgency convinces you that everything matters at once. Clear thinking requires choosing what matters now. Under pressure, the mind wants to hold every variable. That creates overwhelm. Instead, you must simplify. Ask yourself one grounding question. What is the next right step? Not the perfect step, not the final outcome, just the next right step. This question cuts through mental clutter. It turns chaos into sequence, and sequence restores control. Slowing the mind also requires reducing input. When you're under pressure, more information rarely creates clarity. It creates confusion. Notifications, opinions, and noise pile onto an already stressed system. Clear thinkers intentionally limit what they take in during high-pressure moments. They stop scanning. They stop seeking reassurance. They stop chasing certainty. They choose stillness over stimulation. This does not mean avoidance. It means protecting attention. Because attention is the currency of clarity. Wherever your attention goes, your thinking follows. When you slow your mind, you reclaim attention. You begin to see timing more accurately. You realize that many things that feel urgent can wait a few minutes. That pause does not weaken your position, it strengthens it. It allows you to respond with intention rather than impulse. One of the greatest skills under pressure is resisting false urgency. False urgency demands immediate action without understanding. True urgency allows calm action with clarity. Learning the difference takes practice. At first, slowing down will feel uncomfortable. Your mind will argue that you are falling behind, that something bad will happen if you do not act now. This is the survival voice. It is loud, persuasive, and often wrong. Do not fight it, do not obey it. Notice it, breathe. Narrow focus. Take one deliberate step. Over time, this changes how pressure feels. Situations that once triggered panic begin to feel manageable, not because they are easier, but because you are steadier. Speed creates mistakes. Calm creates clarity. And clarity begins the moment you decide to slow your inner world, even when the outer world refuses to slow with you. Chapter 4. Separating Facts from Emotions. Chapter 4. Separating Facts from Emotions. One of the greatest threats to clear thinking under pressure is not emotion itself. It is confusion between what you feel and what is actually happening. Emotions are powerful, they are fast, they demand attention. Under pressure, they speak loudly and confidently, often presenting themselves as facts. Fear says this is dangerous. Anger says this is unacceptable. Anxiety says something is about to go wrong. And because these feelings arrive with intensity, the mind assumes they must be true. But emotions are not evidence, they are signals. A signal tells you that something inside you has been activated. It does not tell you what action is required. When you mistake emotion for fact, you give it authority it does not deserve. Decisions made from that place feel justified in the moment and distorted in hindsight. Clear thinking begins the moment you draw a line between experience and interpretation. What is happening and what you are feeling about it are not the same thing. Under pressure, the mind collapses these two into one story. A delay becomes disrespect. A mistake becomes failure. Uncertainty becomes danger. The emotional reaction fills in gaps that facts have not yet occupied. And once that story is formed, every decision serves it. This is how pressure hijacks judgment. To think clearly, you must learn to separate observation from reaction. Observation is neutral. Reaction is emotional. Observation asks, "What do I know for certain right now?" Reaction declares, "This is bad. This is personal. This must stop." Clear thinkers slow the process down just enough to ask better questions. What are the facts? What evidence do I actually have? What am I assuming? These questions are not about suppressing emotion. They're about placing it in the correct role. Emotion can inform awareness, but it should not decide the outcome. You can feel fear and still choose courage. You can feel anger and still choose restraint. You can feel pressure and still choose clarity. This separation creates stability. When you label emotion accurately, I feel anxious, I feel frustrated, I feel rushed, you regain distance from it. The feeling becomes an object of awareness instead of a command. That distance restores choice. One simple shift makes a profound difference. Replace emotional conclusions with factual statements. Instead of "this is a disaster," ask what specifically is not going as planned. Instead of "they're against me," ask what did they actually say or do. Instead of "I'm failing," ask what part of this needs adjustment. These questions ground the mind. They pull it out of imagined futures and back into present reality. And reality, even when difficult, is easier to work with than emotional projections. Under pressure, the mind also tends to personalize everything. It assumes intent where there may be none. It takes events as reflections of self-worth. This amplifies emotion and clouds judgment. Clear thinking requires depersonalization. Not everything is about you. Not every challenge is a judgment. Not every setback is a statement of value. When you remove the personal narrative, facts become clearer. Decisions become simpler. Emotional charge reduces. This does not make you cold. It makes you accurate. The ability to separate facts from emotions is what allows people to remain composed in chaos. They do not deny how they feel, but they refuse to let feelings rewrite reality. This is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. Each time you pause and ask, "What do I know for sure?" you strengthen clarity. Each time you question an emotional assumption, you weaken its grip. Over time, the mind learns that not every signal requires immediate action. Feel the emotion, name it, then set it aside long enough to think. Clear thinking does not demand emotional absence. It demands emotional honesty. And honesty begins with knowing the difference between what you feel and what is true. One of the most subtle dangers under pressure is not emotional intensity itself, but emotional certainty. When emotions arrive with force, they speak as if they are unquestionably right. The mind hears urgency and assumes truth. This is how emotional reactions quietly replace objective thinking. Clear thinkers learn to slow this internal verdict. They understand that emotions are interpretations shaped by past experience, expectation, and belief. Two people can face the same situation and feel entirely different things. This alone proves that emotion is not reality, it is perspective. Under pressure, perspective narrows. The mind begins filling gaps with assumptions. Silence becomes rejection. Ambiguity becomes threat. Delay becomes disrespect. None of these conclusions are facts, yet they feel convincing because emotion adds weight to them. This is where disciplined questioning becomes essential. Clear thinkers train themselves to interrogate emotional conclusions gently but firmly. Not by arguing with themselves, but by grounding attention in what is observable. They return again and again to neutral language. What was said? What was done? What is actually confirmed? These questions pull thinking out of the emotional narrative and back into reality. Another critical skill is emotional labeling. When emotion is unnamed, it blends with thought. When it is named, it separates. Saying, "I feel anxious," instead of "this is dangerous," creates distance. That distance is not denial, it is clarity. Labeling emotions reduces their intensity and prevents them from hijacking decisions. Clear thinkers also recognize emotional momentum. Emotions under pressure do not stay isolated. One feeling quickly triggers another. Anxiety becomes impatience. Impatience becomes irritation. Irritation becomes anger. If unobserved, this chain reaction accelerates decision-making in the wrong direction. By noticing the first emotion early, they prevent escalation. This early awareness allows intervention before behavior follows. It is far easier to manage unease than to manage anger. Far easier to pause at tension than to repair damage after reaction. Another important practice is separating meaning from data. Under pressure, the mind assigns meaning rapidly. It turns events into judgments about self-worth, competence, or future security. Clear thinkers resist this impulse. They treat events as information, not verdicts. A mistake becomes feedback. A delay becomes timing. A challenge becomes a variable. This neutral framing does not minimize reality. It keeps it workable. Clear thinkers also learn to recognize emotional memory. Past experiences shape current reactions. A previous failure can intensify fear in a new situation. A past conflict can amplify defensiveness. Under pressure, these memories surface silently and influence perception. Awareness of this influence reduces its power. When you recognize that part of your reaction comes from the past, not the present, you regain control. You stop letting old experiences dictate new decisions. This is how emotional intelligence supports clarity. It allows you to respect emotion without surrendering authority to it. Separating facts from emotions does not mean becoming detached. It means becoming accurate. It allows compassion without confusion. It allows care without distortion. It allows feeling without losing direction. Over time, this practice changes your internal experience of pressure. Situations that once felt overwhelming become more navigable. Emotional waves still rise, but they no longer drown thinking. Facts remain visible. Choices remain available. Clarity remains possible. And that is the power of disciplined perception under pressure. Chapter 5. Thinking clearly when others are panicking. Chapter 5. Thinking clearly when others are panicking. Pressure multiplies when it becomes collective. It is one thing to manage your own emotions under stress. It is another to remain clear when everyone around you is losing control. Panic is contagious. So is calm. When people around you feel threatened, uncertain, or overwhelmed, their behavior changes, voices rise, movements become rushed, blame appears, urgency spreads, and without realizing it, you begin absorbing that emotional energy. Your thinking shifts not because the situation worsened, but because the emotional environment did. This is one of the most overlooked sources of poor decisions. Most people believe pressure comes from circumstances. In reality, much of it comes from proximity, from being too close to other people's fear, urgency, and instability. Under collective stress, the mind seeks alignment. It wants to match the group. It wants to move with the crowd. That instinct once protected survival, but today it often destroys clarity. When everyone is rushing, slowing down feels dangerous. When everyone is reacting, pausing feels irresponsible. When everyone is emotional, staying calm feels disconnected. But the opposite is true. In moments of shared panic, clarity becomes more valuable, not less. Clear thinkers understand this. They do not absorb the emotional state of the room. They observe it. They notice tone, pace, and tension without internalizing them. They create a boundary between what others feel and what they choose to carry. This boundary is not arrogance. It is discipline. When you absorb panic, you lose objectivity. You begin making decisions to reduce collective anxiety instead of addressing reality. You say yes too quickly. You escalate unnecessarily. You act to restore comfort, not clarity. Thinking clearly when others are panicking requires internal anchoring. An anchor does not stop the storm. It prevents drift. Clear thinkers anchor themselves to principles, not moods. They return to fundamentals when others lose them. They ask simple questions while others overcomplicate. They focus on what can be controlled while others fixate on what cannot. This makes them appear steady, not loud, not dominant, steady. That steadiness has an effect. People unconsciously slow down around it, voices lower, breathing eases, perspective begins to return. Calm, when genuine, creates psychological safety, and safety restores thinking. This is why leaders who remain calm under pressure are trusted even when they do not have immediate answers. They are not reactive. They are grounded. To think clearly in a panicked environment, you must resist emotional synchronization. You do not need to match the urgency of others to be effective. In fact, matching it often makes things worse. Instead, match reality. Reality does not rush. Reality responds to accuracy. This does not mean ignoring people's emotions. It means not letting those emotions dictate your behavior. You can acknowledge concern without absorbing fear. You can show empathy without surrendering clarity. A simple internal reminder helps. This emotion is not mine. You can listen without carrying. You can care without collapsing. When you maintain clarity, you become a reference point. Others look to you for cues, how fast to move, how serious the situation is, how much hope remains. Even without authority, your presence communicates stability. This is quiet influence, and it only works if it is real. Thinking clearly when others panic is not about appearing calm. It is about being regulated, about staying connected to your breath, your values, and the facts in front of you. About refusing to outsource your thinking to the emotional state of the room. In chaos, the clearest mind becomes the strongest force, not because it controls others, but because it does not lose itself. When panic spreads, logic becomes a minority voice. In tense environments, people do not respond to facts first. They respond to tone, speed, and emotional signals. When fear rises collectively, Even rational individuals begin to mirror the anxiety around them. This is not weakness, it is instinct. But instinct does not create solutions. One of the most important skills you can develop is the ability to stay internally separate from external chaos. This does not mean disengaging. It means refusing to let other people's emotional states override your thinking. Clear thinkers recognize panic early. They notice shifts in behavior, rushed speech, repetitive questions, exaggerated conclusions. Instead of reacting to these signals, they adjust their own state. They slow their breathing. They reduce their words. They become deliberate. This shift is subtle but powerful. When everyone is accelerating, deceleration becomes leadership. You do not need to convince people to calm down. Calm is not transmitted through instruction. It is transmitted through presence. When you remain steady, your nervous system sends a nonverbal signal of safety. Others unconsciously respond to it. This is why the calmest person in the room often becomes the reference point, even without authority. To maintain clarity in collective panic, you must manage boundaries. Emotional boundaries are not walls. They are filters. You listen without absorbing. You acknowledge without amplifying. You respond without mirroring intensity. A simple internal rule helps. I will not match chaos with chaos. When others speak urgently, you respond slowly. When others exaggerate risk, you clarify facts. When others demand immediate answers, you ask precise questions. This does not escalate conflict. It stabilizes it. Another key discipline is resisting group momentum. Panic creates movement, calls for action, meetings, decisions, often before understanding is complete. Clear thinkers do not oppose movement. They refine it. They redirect urgency toward clarity. Instead of asking, "What do we do right now?" they ask, "What exactly is the problem we're solving?" That question alone can shift an entire room. Over time, people begin to trust those who do not panic. Not because they have all the answers, but because they protect clarity when it is most at risk. And in high-pressure environments, that trust becomes influence. Chapter 6. Making decisions without Making decisions without needing certainty. One of the most paralyzing effects of pressure is the demand for certainty. Under stress, the mind begins to negotiate with fear. It tells itself, "I'll decide once I'm sure, once I have more information, once the risk is gone, once the outcome is guaranteed." But certainty rarely arrives when pressure is high, and waiting for it often becomes a decision in itself, one that costs time, momentum, and opportunity. Clear thinkers understand something essential. Certainty is not a requirement for good decisions. In real life, especially under pressure, decisions are made with incomplete information. The future is not fully visible. Outcomes cannot be controlled. What can be controlled is the quality of your reasoning and the values guiding your choice. The need for certainty is emotional, not rational. It comes from fear of being wrong, fear of judgment, fear of consequences. And under pressure, that fear grows louder. The mind mistakes hesitation for wisdom and delay for safety. But hesitation under pressure often amplifies risk. When you wait for certainty, the situation does not stay still. Options close, conditions change, others decide for you. And when the moment finally forces action, you are reacting again, this time with even less control. Choosing without certainty requires a shift in mindset. Instead of asking what choice guarantees success, ask what choice aligns with my principles and the information I have right now. This moves the focus from outcome to integrity. Clear decisions are not always correct in hindsight, but they are coherent in the moment they are made. They are based on reason, not panic, on values, not avoidance. This is where many people struggle. They want reassurance before commitment. They want confidence before action. But confidence is often the result of action, not the prerequisite. Clarity deepens after you decide, not before. This does not mean acting recklessly. It means recognizing when you have enough information to move forward, even if you do not have all the answers. Enough is enough. Clear thinkers define a threshold. They decide in advance what enough information looks like, and when that threshold is met, they act. They do not keep searching for certainty as a way to postpone responsibility. This discipline reduces mental noise. When you accept that uncertainty is unavoidable, pressure loses one of its strongest weapons. You stop demanding impossible conditions. You stop bargaining with fear. You make peace with the fact that every meaningful decision carries risk, and that acceptance creates calm. Another important distinction under pressure is between reversible and irreversible decisions. Not every choice carries the same weight. Some can be adjusted, others cannot. Clear thinkers do not treat every decision as final. They reserve deep deliberation for what truly matters and move quickly on what does not. Pressure tries to flatten this distinction. It makes everything feel critical, but not everything deserves the same level of caution. Knowing when a decision can be corrected reduces fear, and reduced fear improves clarity. When you decide without certainty, you also release the need for immediate validation. You stop looking outward for approval. You trust your reasoning. You stand by your choice without clinging to the outcome. This builds internal authority. People who think clearly under pressure are not fearless. They are decisive despite fear. They understand that avoiding decisions is not safer than making them. Often it is worse. Clarity comes from commitment, not certainty. Once you commit, the mind organizes around the decision. Doubt quiets, focus sharpens, energy returns. The pressure shifts from internal conflict to external execution. That is the moment clarity strengthens. Not because the future became predictable, but because you chose to move forward anyway. This is how clear thinkers act under pressure. The desire for certainty is one of the mind's most convincing traps. It disguises fear as responsibility. It convinces you that waiting is wise, hesitation is cautious, and delay is strategic. But under pressure, this mindset quietly erodes clarity. Clear thinkers accept a difficult truth early. Most important decisions are made without guarantees. Waiting for certainty often means outsourcing responsibility to time, and time does not always improve clarity. It often adds noise. Under pressure, information multiplies, but insight does not. More data does not always mean better decisions. Sometimes it only creates more ways to doubt. This is why clarity requires standards. Clear thinkers decide how they will decide before pressure arrives. They define what matters most. Values, risks they are willing to accept, principles they refuse to compromise. These standards act as internal guard rails when emotion clouds judgment. When a decision appears, they do not ask, "Will this work?" They ask, "Is this aligned?" Alignment reduces regret. Another important discipline is understanding reversibility. Many decisions feel permanent when they are not. Pressure magnifies consequences in the mind. Clear thinkers zoom out. They ask, "Can this be adjusted later?" If yes, they move forward. If no, they slow down, but they still decide. Avoiding decisions creates its own consequences. Indecision under pressure often feels safer, but it quietly hands control to circumstances, competitors, or chance. Clear thinkers prefer intentional risk over passive drift. Once a decision is made, they commit fully. They do not second-guess immediately. They do not rehearse alternatives endlessly. They focus on execution. This commitment stabilizes the mind. Doubt fades when energy is directed forward. Clarity strengthens after action, not before it. This is not recklessness. It is responsibility. Chapter 7. Training your mind to stay. Chapter 7. Training your mind to stay clear over time. Clear over time. Clear thinking under pressure is not a talent you either have or don't. It is the result of what you practice when nothing is at stake. Most people only notice their thinking when pressure forces it into view. By then, habits are already in control. The mind does not rise to the occasion. It falls back on its training. And if that training is inconsistent, clarity will be inconsistent too. This is why lasting clarity is built in quiet moments. Training the mind means developing stability before it is needed. It means rehearsing restraint when there is no urgency. It means strengthening awareness when emotions are low, so it is available when emotions run high. One of the most powerful training tools is reflection, not rumination. Reflection is the deliberate review of how you think, not what you think. After a decision, especially a difficult one, ask simple questions. Where did I rush? Where did emotion influence me? Where did I pause? These questions are not about blame. They're about pattern recognition. Patterns reveal training gaps. When you notice that you consistently react in certain situations, criticism, uncertainty, time, pressure, you gain insight into where clarity breaks down, and insight creates choice. You can only train what you can see. Another critical practice is reducing mental noise. Clarity cannot exist in a constantly stimulated mind. Endless input, news, messages, opinions, notifications, keeps the nervous system in a low-grade state of urgency. Over time, this becomes normal. The mind forgets how stillness feels. Clear thinkers protect their attention. They create space for silence. They limit unnecessary input. They choose depth over constant consumption. This does not make them disconnected from reality. It makes them more grounded in it. Silence is not empty. It is restorative. Even short periods of intentional quiet train the mind to settle. They teach the nervous system that not every moment requires reaction. This baseline calm becomes a resource under pressure. Another overlooked form of training is restraint. Every time you choose not to react to a message, a comment, a provocation, you strengthen self-control. You prove to yourself that urgency does not own you. This builds confidence that is internal, not dependent on conditions. Restraint is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows through use. Clear thinkers also simplify their values. Under pressure, the mind defaults to what it knows best. If your values are unclear, decisions become chaotic. But when values are defined, they act as anchors. They guide action when emotions are loud. Ask yourself, what principles do I refuse to violate even under pressure? Clarity in values reduces hesitation. It provides direction when information is incomplete. Training over time also means accepting imperfection. You will not think clearly every time. You will react. You will rush. You will feel emotion take over. This does not erase progress. Training is not about perfection. It is about recovery. How quickly you return to clarity matters more than how often you lose it. Each recovery strengthens resilience. Each correction deepens awareness. Over time, the distance between pressure and clarity shrinks. What once took hours now takes minutes. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. This is how clarity becomes stable, not dramatic, not sudden, stable. And stability is what allows clear thinking to last. When pressure becomes a constant part of life, clear minds are built, not discovered. Clarity is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in repetition. Most people wait for pressure to reveal who they are. Clear thinkers prepare long before it arrives. They treat mental discipline the same way athletes treat physical conditioning. Consistent, intentional, often invisible. One of the most effective long-term practices is intentional discomfort. When you voluntarily choose restraint, pausing before responding, delaying gratification, staying silent when provoked, you train your nervous system to tolerate tension without collapsing. This tolerance becomes invaluable under pressure. Another powerful habit is mental debriefing. At the end of difficult days, clear thinkers review moments of emotional intensity, not to judge, but to learn. Where did I rush? Where did I stay grounded? What triggered the reaction? This reflection turns experience into training. Over time, awareness sharpens. You begin noticing pressure earlier before it overwhelms. You feel emotional shifts sooner. This early detection gives you more control, more choice, more clarity. Clear thinkers also respect cognitive limits. They know that exhaustion, overstimulation, and lack of rest destroy judgment. So they protect sleep. They simplify commitments. They reduce unnecessary decision-making. This is not weakness. It is strategic clarity management. You cannot think clearly in a constantly depleted state. Finally, they build identity around clarity, not confidence, not dominance, clarity. They begin to see themselves as someone who does not rush, does not overreact, does not decide from fear. Identity reinforces behavior. Behavior reinforces clarity. Over time, this becomes automatic. Pressure no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a signal to return to discipline. And discipline practiced daily becomes the quiet strength that holds everything together. Chapter 8. Becoming someone others trust under pressure. Becoming someone others trust under pressure. Trust is not built when things are easy. It is revealed when things are difficult. Under pressure, people instinctively look for stability. They look for someone who is not rushing, not panicking, not overwhelmed by emotion. They look for cues, subtle signals that say, this situation is being handled, and those cues do not come from words. They come from presence. Clear thinking under pressure does more than improve your own decisions. It changes how others experience you. When you remain steady, people feel it. When you pause instead of reacting, they notice. When you choose clarity over drama, your credibility increases. Not because you are perfect, but because you are consistent. Consistency is the foundation of trust. Most people lose trust not through mistakes, but through instability. One moment calm, the next reactive. One moment confident, the next defensive. Under pressure, inconsistency becomes visible, and visibility amplifies impact. Clear thinkers understand that their internal state communicates before they speak. A regulated nervous system sends a powerful message. There is no immediate danger. This message lowers tension around you. It slows conversations. It creates space for better thinking, not just for you, but for everyone involved. This is how calm becomes leadership, not by controlling others, but by controlling yourself. When pressure rises, many people try to assert authority through speed or force. They speak louder, they decide faster, they push harder, but this often increases resistance and fear. Clear thinkers do the opposite. They ground first, they listen more. They respond with precision instead of volume. This earns respect quietly. People trust those who do not escalate unnecessarily, those who can hold uncertainty without collapsing, those who do not need to prove control by dominating the moment. Under pressure, trust is built through restraint. Another key element of trust is reliability. When people know that you will not be hijacked by emotion, they feel safer bringing problems to you. They know you will not overact. They know you will think before acting. This makes you a reference point in chaos. You become someone others lean toward, not away from. This does not require a title. It requires discipline. Clear thinkers also understand their limits. They do not pretend to know everything. They're honest about uncertainty without spreading doubt. This balance, confidence without arrogance, deepens trust. Saying, "I don't know yet, but I will think this through," is far more stabilizing than pretending certainty you do not have. Trust grows when people feel that decisions are made thoughtfully, not impulsively. Over time, this reputation compounds. You are remembered not for dramatic actions, but for steady ones, not for emotional intensity, but for reliability. When pressure returns, as it always does, people look to you again. This is the long-term impact of clear thinking. It shapes not only outcomes, but identity. You become someone who is calm when it matters, someone whose decisions carry weight, someone whose presence reduces chaos instead of adding to it. This is not performance, it is practice. And it begins with the choice to think clearly when pressure invites you to do the opposite. You do not need to be fearless. You need to be grounded. Because in a world that reacts quickly, the person who remains clear becomes rare, and rarity creates trust. Trust under pressure is not built through performance. It is built through predictability of character. When situations become tense, people are not looking for the smartest person in the room. They are looking for the most stable one. Stability signals safety. Safety allows thinking to return. And thinking is what pressure removes first. This is why trust under pressure has little to do with charisma. It has everything to do with regulation. People subconsciously track how you behave when stakes rise. They notice whether your tone changes, whether your patience disappears, whether your words become sharper or rushed. These signals matter more than what you say. They tell others whether you are anchored or being pulled by the moment. Clear thinkers understand this. They know that under pressure who you are becomes louder than what you know. This awareness changes how they show up. They do not try to appear calm. They become calm. They do not try to dominate the situation. They stabilize it. They do not rush to prove competence. They demonstrate it through restraint. This restraint builds trust in a quiet, cumulative way. When people see that you do not escalate emotionally, they relax. When they see that you do not rush to judgment, they feel heard. When they see that you do not change direction every time pressure shifts, they begin to rely on you. Reliability creates authority. And authority under pressure is never loud. One of the most important aspects of trust is emotional consistency. Under pressure, inconsistency feels dangerous. When someone is calm one moment and reactive the next, others cannot predict outcomes. Unpredictability increases anxiety. Anxiety erodes trust. Clear thinkers minimize emotional volatility. This does not mean they suppress emotion. It means they regulate expression. They do not allow frustration to leak into tone. They do not let urgency harden their words. They remain measured even when decisions are difficult. This signals maturity. People trust those who can hold complexity without becoming overwhelmed by it, who can listen without becoming defensive, who can acknowledge uncertainty without spreading fear. Another key element of trust under pressure is clarity of intention. When pressure rises, many people communicate reactively. Their messages become confusing. They speak in fragments. They contradict themselves. This creates instability. Clear thinkers communicate simply. They slow down enough to choose words carefully. They avoid exaggeration. They name reality without dramatizing it. Even when the message is difficult, the clarity of delivery reduces emotional shock. People trust clarity more than reassurance. Saying, "This is challenging, but here is what we know and what we're doing next," builds far more confidence than false certainty ever could. Over time, people begin to associate you with steadiness. They remember how you handled moments that mattered. They remember that you did not panic, deflect, or disappear. This memory becomes reputation. Reputation under pressure is powerful. It precedes you into future situations. People give you more space to think, more time to decide, more trust when uncertainty appears again. This is how clarity compounds. It is also important to understand that trust does not require perfection. Mistakes do not destroy trust. Emotional outbursts do not automatically erase it. What damages trust is refusal to self-correct. Clear thinkers repair quickly. They acknowledge missteps without defensiveness. They recalibrate without ego. They return to clarity instead of doubling down on error. This ability to recover reinforces trust more than flawless performance ever could, because recovery shows self-awareness, and self-awareness creates safety. At the deepest level, becoming someone others trust under pressure requires alignment between inner state and outer behavior. When your internal experience is regulated, your actions become coherent. When actions are coherent, people feel secure. This is not manipulation, it is integrity. You're not trying to manage perception, you are managing yourself, and that is why it works. Over time, you stop trying to earn trust. It becomes a byproduct of how you think, decide, and respond when pressure arrives. You become known as someone who does not lose themselves in chaos, someone who stays, someone who thinks, someone who does not break when things get difficult. In a world that reacts quickly and emotionally, that kind of presence is rare, and rarity creates gravity. People lean toward it. They rely on it. They trust it, not because you demand authority, but because clarity gives it to you naturally. Pressure will not, conclusion thinking clearly is a daily choice, disappear from your life. If anything, it will increase. As responsibilities grow, expectations rise, decisions carry more weight, time feels tighter, and the moments that matter most rarely arrive when you feel calm, rested, or ready. They arrive when emotions are active, information is incomplete, and the cost of getting it wrong feels high. This audiobook was never about removing pressure. It was about changing your relationship with it, because pressure itself is neutral. It does not decide for you. It only reveals how prepared your mind is to respond. Throughout this journey, you've seen a pattern repeat again and again. Clear thinking breaks down not because you're incapable, but because the mind defaults to survival when it is untrained. Reaction replaces choice. Emotion replaces perspective. Urgency replaces judgment. And yet every chapter pointed to the same truth. Clarity is recoverable. You learned why pressure narrows thinking and why that narrowing is biological, not personal. You learned the difference between reacting and choosing, and how a brief pause can restore control. You learned how to slow your mind when everything feels urgent, how to separate facts from emotions, and how to stay grounded when others are panicking. You learned that certainty is not required for good decisions, that waiting for perfect conditions often increases risk, and that clarity deepens after commitment, not before it. You learn that clear thinking is trained in quiet moments through reflection, restraint, and protection of attention. And finally, you saw how clarity under pressure shapes trust how steadiness becomes influence, how presence becomes leadership without force. These are not abstract ideas, they are practices. And like all practices, they only work when applied. You do not need to remember every concept from this audiobook. You need to remember one thing: when pressure shows up, you have a choice. You can react or you can pause. You can absorb emotion or you can observe it. You can rush for relief or you can decide from clarity. That choice may only last a few seconds, but those seconds determine the direction of your actions, your words, and often your future. Clarity is not about being slow. It is about being deliberate. It is not about being emotionless. It is about being regulated. It is not about controlling outcomes. It is about controlling your response. If you want to turn this audio book into lived change, begin small. For the next few days, do one thing. When you feel the urge to react, pause. Just pause. Notice the sensation, the tightening, the urgency. Name it. Breathe once slowly. Ask yourself one simple question. Is this clarity or is this emotion asking to act? Then choose. You will not always choose perfectly. That is not the goal. The goal is awareness. Because awareness is the doorway to clarity, and clarity, once practiced, becomes reliable. Over time, the pause grows easier. The mind settles faster. Pressure loses its grip. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Not because life changed, but because you did. Thinking clearly under pressure is not a single breakthrough. It is a daily decision. A decision to slow the inner world even when the outer world accelerates. A decision to trust principles over impulses. A decision to lead yourself before trying to lead anything else. Pressure will test you again. That is certain. But now you are no longer unprepared. You know that clarity is not found in the absence of stress, but in the presence of discipline. And discipline practiced quietly becomes strength when it matters most. Thank you for taking the time to train your mind. Carry this clarity with you, and when pressure returns, as it always does, meet it calmly.